I always thought the worst day of my career would come from a mistake I made, not from a lie someone else decided to tell. For years, I showed up early, stayed late, and did everything I could to keep my name off the list of problems in the office. I wasn't the loudest, I wasn't the favorite, but I was steady, reliable, invisible in the way that makes managers feel safe. At least, that's what I believed. The morning everything changed started like any other. I walked into the building with my laptop bag on my shoulder, the same blue mug in my hand, the same security guard nodding at me from behind the desk. The elevator ride was quiet, just me and my thoughts. I was already planning the tasks for the day when I noticed something off the moment I stepped onto our floor. People looked tense. It wasn't obvious at first, but as I moved between the cubicles, I saw conversations stop mid-sentence. A coworker quickly minimized a chat window when I passed. Someone else pretended to be deeply focused on a spreadsheet they clearly hadn't been looking at seconds earlier. All those tiny, nervous gestures added up to one thing. Something was wrong, and whatever it was, it had something to do with me. I tried to ignore it and focused on the routine. I sat down, woke up my computer, and waited for the familiar flood of emails. It took only a few seconds for the first one to pull the ground from under my feet. The subject line from Human Resources read, "Notice of Performance Review Escalation." I frowned. I hadn't been scheduled for any review. The message was polite, but the meaning behind it wasn't. It said there had been ongoing concerns about my performance and professionalism. It mentioned missed deadlines, ignored messages, and a pattern of unresponsiveness to my manager. None of that was true. I stared at the email, reading it again and again, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. Before I could even finish processing it, another email arrived. This one was from my boss, Mark. The subject line was simple and cold. "We need to talk today." He said the company was losing patience, that there had been multiple documented attempts to reach me about critical tasks, and that he had no choice but to involve HR if the situation didn't change immediately. I felt like I was falling into a hole I couldn't see the bottom of. I opened my sent folder, then my inbox, searching for any messages I might have missed. Anything that could explain what he was talking about. Nothing made sense. I had answered every email he sent, often within minutes. I reviewed recent threads and saw no sign of the chaos his words suggested. But then, as I dug deeper, I saw an email chain I didn't recognize. The thread was between Mark and me. At least that's how it looked. According to the conversation, he had sent me several urgent requests over the last 2 weeks. The messages showed him asking for updates, assigning tasks, warning me about deadlines. And I had responded with short, dismissive replies. One-liners like, "I'll get to it when I have time," and "You're overreacting." The kind of replies I would never send to anyone, especially not my boss. My stomach dropped. The email addresses were real. The timestamps lined up with days I definitely remembered working. But I had no memory of writing any of those messages. If someone glanced quickly, it would look like clear proof that I was irresponsible and disrespectful. It was the kind of thing that, taken at face value, could absolutely get someone fired. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. Whether I had somehow developed the ability to send emails in my sleep, or someone was manipulating something very carefully. And the way people were avoiding my eyes that morning told me one more thing. Mark had probably already shared those messages with others. Around mid-morning, he walked by my desk without saying a word. He didn't even look at me. It was like I had already been convicted. I knew I couldn't walk into a meeting with HR and just say, "I didn't do it." That's not how this works. HR trusts documentation, screenshots, threads, logs. They trust what they can print out and highlight. If someone had gone to the trouble of falsifying an entire pattern of unresponsiveness, then I needed something stronger than a denial. I opened one of the suspect emails and drilled down into the technical details. Most people don't even know that every message carries a hidden trail of data with it. But once you learn how to read it, those lines tell a story of their own. I examined the routing information, the authentication stamps, the IP addresses. At first glance, everything looked normal. The domain was ours. The addresses were correct. But then I noticed something strange. The emails Mark supposedly sent me had all passed through the company's standard mail server. That checked out. But the replies from me had an additional hop in the route, an extra relay that shouldn't have been there. It was subtle, almost invisible, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That extra hop pointed to a local device on our internal network, not to my workstation, to a different one entirely. I wrote the device identifier down on a notepad and stared at it. It looked familiar, but I couldn't place where I had seen it before. I searched my memory, retracing the last few months. Then it hit me. During a system-wide outage, IT had sent out a spreadsheet listing workstation IDs so people could confirm their machines were back online. That string of characters matched one I had noticed back then, the one assigned to Mark's office computer. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the scribbled ID. My own boss had been sending messages that looked like they came from me, from his machine. I wanted to believe there was some other explanation. Maybe it was a backup. Maybe IT had routed something incorrectly. But when I cross-checked the logs, the pattern was too consistent. Every rude reply from me had been routed through his device first. Every ignored message he claimed to have sent lined up with moments when I was either in a meeting with him or already working on the tasks he said I never acknowledged. It was like watching someone slowly build a case against me using a pile of carefully crafted illusions. By early afternoon, I was called into the conference room. HR was already there, with a printed packet of emails in front of them. Mark sat at the end of the table, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. His expression was serious, calm, maybe even a little satisfied. They asked me to sit. The HR representative began by reading portions of the emails aloud. They asked if I recognized them. They asked if I understood how they could be interpreted. I listened to my supposed words being used against me, and even I had to admit, if I didn't know the truth, I might have believed I deserved to be there. When they were done, they gave me a chance to respond. I could have started with emotion. I could have said, "This isn't fair," or "I would never speak like that." But I knew that wasn't enough. So instead, I opened my laptop, took a breath, and asked them to look at the emails again. Not as text, but as data. I projected one of the message headers onto the screen. I explained, line by line, what the routing sequence meant. I highlighted the extra relay hop that shouldn't have been there. I showed them how every normal, legitimate email I sent went straight from my machine to the internal mail server. But the problematic replies had taken a detour through a single, very specific device. Then I pulled up the log from the outage spreadsheet. I didn't have to say anything. The matching device ID spoke for itself. HR went quiet. Mark's expression shifted just slightly, enough for me to see the first crack in his confidence. He tried to interrupt, to say that I was misinterpreting technical information, but I moved to the next piece of evidence before he could reclaim control. I opened a separate email thread, one I had forwarded to my personal account weeks earlier, purely by habit. In that original conversation, Mark and I had discussed a project deadline. My replies had been detailed, cooperative, professional. The version HR had in their printed stack looked similar, but key sentences were different. Words had been changed. One line that originally said, "I'll update you on the progress this afternoon," had become, "I'll get to it if I have time." It was a subtle change, but poisonous. I showed them both versions. The one in our official system, conveniently edited, and the one safely preserved in my personal inbox. Then I pulled up the message trace logs that showed when modifications had been made to the internal copy. Every edit, every forged reply was tied back to Mark's login. This time, HR didn't even try to hide their shock. They turned to him and asked for an explanation. He shifted in his chair, cleared his throat, and said something about being under pressure and needing accountability. He tried to spin it as a misguided attempt to document a pattern that he believed existed. He said that maybe he had overstepped, but that his intentions were to protect the company. Intentions don't change the fact that he had manufactured evidence against me. I sat there, listening to my own boss admit, in carefully chosen words, that he had rewritten reality to justify a decision he had already made. He wanted me gone. And instead of talking to me, instead of coaching me, instead of facing me as a human being, he chose the quiet path of digital manipulation. Eventually, the meeting ended not with my termination, but with his suspension pending investigation. As I walked out of that glass-walled conference room, my legs felt numb. I had saved my job, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like waking up from a nightmare and realizing the shadows are still in the room with you. Over the next few days, fragments of the story leaked through the office. People pieced things together. The glances changed again. Not pity this time, not suspicion. Something closer to respect, or maybe unease. They realized how close I had come to being erased based on a pile of edited sentences and fake replies. I went back to my desk and opened my email one more time. I scrolled through legitimate threads, the real conversations, the genuine work I had done. Mixed among them were the broken remains of the story Mark tried to tell about me. A story where I was lazy, unprofessional, and indifferent. A story that would have followed me for years if I hadn't dug deeper than the surface. That day, I learned something I'll never forget. In modern offices, the truth doesn't always come from the loudest voice in the room or the highest title on a business card. It doesn't always show up in meetings or performance reviews. Sometimes, the truth lives quietly in the details no one expects you to understand. In server logs, in timestamps, in the paths an email takes on its way to your inbox. You can fake words. You can fake tone. You can even fake outrage. But it's a lot harder to fake the trail. My boss tried to fire me with a stack of emails that were never real. In the end, it was the email thread itself that saved me. Every lie he carefully constructed left a shadow. And when the lights finally came on, those shadows pointed straight back at him. That's the thing about office justice. It doesn't always come when you want it to. It doesn't always arrive politely or quickly. But when the system remembers more than the liar expects, when the data speaks louder than the story, the truth eventually catches up. And when it does, it doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen.